In the quiet suburbs of Millfield, where manicured lawns hide family secrets and perfect facades conceal broken hearts, 8-year-old Emma's stomach growled for the third day in a row. While her wealthy guardians dined on expensive meals just rooms away, she pressed her small hands against her empty belly, wondering if anyone in the world would ever truly care about her. Little did she know that across town, a man who had lost everything was about to discover that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change two lives forever. What happens when a child's desperate cry for help meets a stranger's wounded heart? This is the story of how abandonment and loss can transform into hope and family, proving that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they just have open hearts and willing hands. Emma Richardson sat on the cold marble floor of the grand hallway, her small fingers tracing the intricate patterns while her stomach twisted with hunger. The massive house around her was filled with expensive furniture, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings worth more than most people's homes, yet she felt completely empty inside. Her guardians, Margaret and Charles Whitmore, had taken her in 3 years ago after her parents died in a car accident, but their care felt more like a business arrangement than love. The 8-year-old girl had learned to be invisible in this house. She knew exactly which floorboards creaked, which doorways to avoid, and how to move through the corridors without drawing attention to herself. The Whitmores had made it clear from the beginning that children should be seen and not heard, though Emma often wondered if they would prefer she wasn't seen either. Margaret Whitmore was a tall, sharp woman who wore her graying hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She spent her days organizing charity events for the town's elite, speaking passionately about helping underprivileged children while ignoring the hungry child under her own roof. Charles was quieter, but equally cold, a successful businessman who viewed Emma as another acquisition rather than a little girl who needed love and care. 3 days had passed since Emma's last real meal. The Whitmores had been entertaining guests all weekend, hosting elaborate dinner parties where the dining room table groaned under the weight of gourmet food. Emma could smell the roasted meats, fresh bread, and rich desserts wafting through the house, but she wasn't allowed to join them. Instead, she was sent to her room early each night with nothing but a glass of water and strict instructions to remain quiet. Her bedroom was beautiful by any standard, decorated with expensive furniture and filled with toys she rarely played with. But beauty couldn't fill an empty stomach or heal a lonely heart. Emma had tried asking for food that morning, approaching Margaret carefully in the kitchen while she supervised the catering staff preparing for another dinner party. Margaret had looked down at her with cold eyes and said, "Children who interrupt important preparations don't deserve rewards. You should have thought about that before making noise during yesterday's luncheon." Emma hadn't made any noise during the luncheon. She had been in her room, reading quietly, but she had learned that arguing with Margaret only made things worse. As the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, Emma found herself drawn to the front of the house. She pressed her face against the cool glass, watching the normal world outside where other children played in their yards and families gathered for Sunday dinners. Her breath fogged the window as she whispered a small prayer, something she had started doing more often lately. She prayed for her parents, asking them to somehow send help, to let someone know that she was hungry and scared and desperately alone in this house full of people who didn't care about her. The Whitmores were in the sitting room, discussing their upcoming trip to Europe. Emma had overheard them talking about leaving her with the housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who was kind but spoke limited English and was too frightened of the Whitmores to go against their wishes. Emma knew that when they left, things would only get worse. Mrs. Chen would follow whatever instructions Margaret left, which usually involved keeping Emma out of sight and giving her minimal food. Emma's hand shook slightly as she thought about the week ahead. She had learned to ration the few crackers she managed to sneak from the kitchen, making them last as long as possible. Sometimes she would find fruit that had fallen from the trees in the backyard. But winter was coming, and soon even that small source of food would be gone. The sound of laughter from the sitting room made Emma's chest tight with sadness. She could hear Margaret's high-pitched laugh mixing with Charles's deeper chuckle as they shared stories with their guests about their charitable work. Just last week, Margaret had given a speech at the country club about the importance of caring for orphan children. Receiving a standing ovation from the crowd, Emma had watched from the car as Margaret accepted praise and donations, knowing that none of that compassion would ever reach her. As evening approached, the dinner guests began arriving. Emma recognized many of them from previous gatherings. Wealthy couples from around town who drove expensive cars and wore designer clothes. They would spend hours discussing their vacations, their business deals, and their children's accomplishments at private schools. Sometimes they asked about Emma, and Margaret would smile sweetly and say she was doing wonderfully. Perhaps mention how well she was doing in school or how grateful she was for their care. Emma retreated to her room as instructed, but the sounds of the dinner party below made her hunger even more intense. She could hear the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter. The smell of food drifted up through the heating vents, making her mouth water and her stomach cramp with emptiness. She tried to distract herself by looking at the photo of her parents she kept hidden in her dresser drawer. Her mother had been warm and loving, always ready with hugs and homemade cookies. Her father had been playful and kind, lifting her high into the air and making her laugh until her sides hurt. They had lived in a small apartment, but it had felt like the most wonderful place in the world because it was filled with love. Now Emma lived in a mansion that felt like a prison. She had everything money could buy except the things that mattered most: love, kindness, and enough food to stop the constant ache in her stomach. She pressed the photo against her chest and whispered to her parents, telling them about her day, about how hungry she was, and about how much she missed them. Outside her window, the moon was rising over the quiet neighborhood. In houses throughout Millfield, families were gathering around dinner tables. Children were being tucked into bed with full stomachs and loving words, and parents were reading bedtime stories to sleepy little ones. Emma pressed her face against the window and looked out at all those lit windows, wondering if anyone out there might help her if they knew what was happening in the big house on Maple Street. She didn't know that across town, in a small apartment above a struggling bookstore, a man named David Martinez was sitting alone at his own window, looking out at the same moon and wondering if he would ever find a purpose in life again. David had lost his wife and young daughter in an accident 2 years ago, and since then he had been going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. His bookstore was failing, his savings were nearly gone, and most days he wondered if there was any point in continuing. David spent his evenings walking through the quiet neighborhoods of Millfield, unable to sleep in the apartment that still held so many memories of his family. He often found himself drawn to the wealthy section of town, not out of envy, but because the tree-lined streets reminded him of places he used to take his daughter for walks. These walks were the only time he felt any peace, when the gentle rhythm of his footsteps and the quiet of the evening helped calm the storm of grief and loneliness that lived in his chest. Tomorrow, his evening walk would take him down Maple Street for the first time, where he would hear something that would change both his life and Emma's forever. But tonight, both Emma and David sat at their respective windows. Two lonely souls separated by distance and circumstance, neither knowing that fate was about to bring them together in the most unexpected way. Emma fell asleep that night with her stomach empty, but her heart full of hope that somehow, some way, someone would hear her silent cries for help. She dreamed of her parents and warm meals, and a place where she was truly wanted. In her dreams, a kind stranger with gentle eyes reached out his hand to her, offering not just food, but the love and safety she had been praying for. Little did she know that her dreams were about to become reality. David Martinez pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he stepped out into the cool evening air. His bookstore, Stories and Dreams, sat dark and empty behind him, much like his life these days. The store that had once been his pride and joy, filled with the laughter of his wife Sarah and the excited squeals of his 4-year-old daughter Lily, now felt like a monument to everything he had lost. The familiar weight of grief settled on his chest as he began his nightly walk. 2 years had passed since the accident, but the pain felt as fresh as ever. Sarah and Lily had been coming to meet him at the bookstore for their weekly family dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light. In an instant, his entire world had disappeared, leaving him alone with memories and a business that was slowly crumbling around him. Tonight, David found his feet carrying him toward the affluent side of Millfield, where the houses grew larger and the lawns more perfectly manicured. He usually avoided this area because the happy families visible through lit windows only reminded him of what he had lost. But something drew him forward tonight. Maybe it was the way the moon cast long shadows through the oak trees. Or maybe it was simply his subconscious seeking a different route through his grief. Maple Street was particularly quiet, lined with mansions that seemed to tower over him like silent monuments to success and wealth. David walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, trying to focus on the rhythm of his footsteps rather than the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. He was passing a particularly large house when he heard something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was crying. Not the dramatic sobbing of an adult, but the quiet, desperate weeping of a child. The sound was coming from somewhere above him, probably a second-story window. David looked up at the imposing house with its perfect landscaping and expensive cars in the driveway, wondering why a child in such obvious wealth would be crying with such heartbreak. He almost kept walking. After all, it wasn't his business, and wealthy families probably had their own ways of handling their children's problems. but something about the sound tugged at his heart in a way he hadn't felt since losing Lily. The crying was so soft, so filled with despair, that it reminded him of the times his own daughter had cried from nightmares or when she was sick. David stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, listening. The crying continued, punctuated by small hiccuping sobs that spoke of hours of tears. No adult voice came to comfort the child. No footsteps approached to offer help. Just the lonely sound of a little one suffering in silence. Unable to ignore it any longer, David approached the house. The front yard was immaculate, with expensive lighting highlighting sculptured bushes and a fountain that gurgled softly in the darkness. Through the large windows on the ground floor, he could see the warm glow of lights and the shadows of people moving about, apparently hosting some kind of gathering. The contrast between the obvious wealth and comfort below and the desperate crying above struck him as deeply wrong. David had worked with children for years at his bookstore, hosting reading groups and helping parents find the perfect books for their little ones. He knew the difference between a child crying because they didn't get their way and a child crying from genuine distress. This was definitely the latter. He looked around, unsure of what to do. Should he knock on the front door and interrupt what appeared to be an elegant dinner party? Should he call the police? Should he just mind his own business and walk away? But as another wave of soft sobbing drifted down from the window above, David knew he couldn't leave. Moving closer to the house, he positioned himself below what seemed to be the source of the crying. Looking up, he could see a window with a faint light behind sheer curtains. Taking a deep breath, David called out softly, "Hello? Are you okay up there?" The crying stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was complete silence, except for the distant sounds of the party from downstairs and the gentle bubbling of the fountain. Then, very quietly, a small voice replied, "Who's there?" David's heart clenched at the sound. It was definitely a young child, probably no older than 8 or 9, and the voice was thick with tears and fear. "My name is David," he called back, keeping his voice gentle and reassuring. "I was walking by and heard you crying. Are you hurt? Do you need help?" There was another long pause, and David could almost feel the child's uncertainty. Finally, the small voice came again, stronger this time. "I'm Anna. I'm okay, I guess. Just hungry. The word hit David like a physical blow. In this mansion worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, a child was crying from hunger. "When did you last eat, Anna?" he called up, his voice filled with concern. 3 days ago, came the whispered reply. "Well, I had some water yesterday and I found an old cracker in my pocket, but that's all." David felt a surge of anger so intense it surprised him. How was it possible that in a house like this, with people entertaining guests downstairs, a child could go 3 days without food? "Emma, where are your parents? Are there adults in the house who are supposed to be taking care of you?" "My guardians are downstairs." Emma's voice was small and scared. "They're having a party. They said I can't eat until I learn to be quiet, but I was quiet. I was reading in my room like they told me to, but they said I was still being bad somehow." David's hands clenched into fists. He had spent 2 years walking through life feeling numb and disconnected, but suddenly he was filled with a protective rage that reminded him of how he used to feel when someone threatened his family. This little girl was being starved as punishment in a house full of abundance, and the injustice of it made his blood boil.
"Emma, listen to me very carefully," David said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him.
"What you're experiencing is not okay. Children should never be denied food, no matter what they've done. You are not bad, and you don't deserve to be hungry." He could hear sniffling from above, and then Emma's voice came down. So quiet he had to strain to hear it. "My mommy and daddy used to make sure I always had dinner. They said growing girls need good food. But they died, and now I live here, and everything is different." David closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache of loss, mixed with a fierce determination to help this child. "Emma, I lost my family too. I know how scary and lonely it feels when the people who are supposed to love you aren't there anymore. But what's happening to you right now is not because you're bad or because you deserve it. It's because the adults who are supposed to care for you are failing at their job. Are you going to tell them I was talking to someone?" Emma's voice was filled with fear. "They get really mad when I bother people or draw attention to the house." "No, Emma, I'm not going to get you in trouble," David assured her. "But I am going to help you. Are you able to come to your window?" There was the sound of small footsteps, and then the curtains at the window moved slightly. David could see a pale little face peering down at him, partially hidden by the windowsill. Even in the dim light he could see that she was thin, too thin, with large eyes that held far too much sadness for someone so young. "Hi, Emma," David said gently, offering a small wave. "I know this is scary, talking to a stranger, but I promise I only want to help you. I used to have a little girl, and if she were in trouble like you are, I would hope someone would help her." Emma's face disappeared for a moment, then returned. "What happened to your little girl?" David swallowed hard. It was still difficult to talk about, but something about Emma's situation made his own loss feel less important than her immediate need. "She died in an accident, along with my wife. It was very sad, and I miss them every day. But right now, you're the little girl who needs help, and I think maybe helping you is something they would want me to do." "I'm sorry your family died," Emma whispered. "It's scary when people you love go away and don't come back."
Yes, it is scary, David agreed.
"But Emma, you don't have to be scared about food anymore. I'm going to make sure you get something to eat. Can you open your window?" Emma hesitated. "I'm not supposed to open windows. And I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. But you seem nice and I'm so hungry it hurts." "Being careful about strangers is usually very smart," David said. "But sometimes, when you're in real danger, you have to trust your instincts. What does your heart tell you about me?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the moonlight. "My heart says you have kind eyes, like my daddy did. And you sound sad like I feel, but not mean sad. Just missing someone sad." David felt tears prick at his eyes. This little girl, hungry and abandoned, was still capable of such insight and compassion. "That's exactly right, Emma. I am missing someone sad, not mean sad. And I promise you I only want to help." With obvious effort, Emma managed to push open the heavy window. David could see her more clearly now. She was indeed far too thin, with tangled hair and clothes that looked like she had been sleeping in them for days. But her eyes were alert and intelligent, and despite everything she had been through, she looked down at him with a tentative trust that broke his heart. "Okay," Emma said, her voice stronger now that the window was open. "What do we do now?" David looked up at this brave little girl who had just put her faith in a stranger and felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time since losing his family, he had a clear purpose, a reason to fight. Emma needed him, and he was not going to let her down. "Now," David said with determination, "we make sure you never go hungry again."
David stared up at Emma's pale face in the window, his mind racing through possibilities.
The child was clearly in immediate danger from neglect, but he also knew that simply calling the police might not solve the problem. The Whitmores were obviously wealthy and well-connected, and children from abusive homes were sometimes returned to their guardians after investigations that didn't uncover the full truth. He needed to be smart about this. "Emma," he called up softly, "I need you to help me understand something. How long have you been living here with the Whitmores?" 3 years, Emma replied, her small voice carrying clearly in the quiet night air. "Ever since Mummy and Daddy died in the car accident," the social worker said. "The Whitmores were good people who wanted to help children like me." David felt his anger burning hotter. 3 years of this treatment, and apparently no one had noticed or cared enough to investigate. "Emma, do you go to school? Do you have teachers who might wonder where you are?" Emma nodded. "I go to Millfield Elementary, but I missed today because Mrs. Whitmore said I was sick. She tells them I'm sick sometimes when I look too tired or too sad. The teachers believe her because she donates lots of money to the school." The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying. The Whitmores were using their wealth and social standing to hide their abuse, keeping Emma isolated and ensuring that any signs of neglect would be explained away as temporary illness. David knew he needed to act quickly, but he also needed evidence and a solid plan. "Emma, I want to help you get some food right now, but I need you to trust me and be very brave. Can you do that?" Emma nodded eagerly, and David could see the hope shining in her eyes despite her exhaustion and hunger. He looked around the area, assessing the situation. The window was on the second floor, too high for Emma to climb down safely, but there was a large oak tree nearby with branches that extended close to the house. "Listen carefully," David said. "I'm going to my car to get some things. While I'm gone, I want you to pack a small bag with your most important things. Some clothes, anything that belonged to your parents, anything you don't want to leave behind. Can you do that quietly?" "Where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice filled with both excitement and nervousness. Somewhere safe where you'll never be hungry again, David promised. I'm going to take you to people who will help us make sure you're protected and cared for properly. David jogged back to where he had parked his old sedan several blocks away. In the trunk, he kept an emergency kit that he had assembled during his more paranoid days after the accident. Rope, a flashlight, basic first aid supplies, and some energy bars. He had never imagined he would be using these supplies for a midnight rescue mission. But life had a way of preparing you for moments you never saw coming. He also grabbed a spare jacket and the small stuffed elephant that he had been unable to throw away after Lily's death. Something told him Emma might need comfort as much as she needed food. When he returned to the house, he could see Emma's silhouette moving around her room as she quietly gathered her belongings. The sounds of the dinner party below continued uninterrupted. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the murmur of conversation. It sickened him that these people could be entertaining guests while a child in their care was starving just floors above them. Emma, he whispered up to the window. I'm back, how are you doing? Her face appeared at the window, and he could see she was clutching a small backpack. I got my clothes and my picture of Mommy and Daddy and my favorite book. Is that okay? That's perfect, David assured her. Now I need you to listen very carefully. I'm going to climb up this tree and help you get down. It might be a little scary, but I promise I won't let you fall. David had been athletic in his younger days, and despite the toll that grief had taken on him, he found that adrenaline gave him strength he didn't know he still possessed. He climbed the oak tree carefully, testing each branch to make sure it would hold his weight. As he got higher, he could see into Emma's room. A beautiful space that should have been a little girl's dream, but which had become her prison. When he reached the branch closest to her window, he was able to extend his hand to Emma. Okay, sweetheart, I need you to be very brave now. Can you step out onto the windowsill and take my hand? Emma looked down at the ground far below, and David could see her trembling. It's really high, she whispered. I know it's scary, David said gently. But I'm going to hold on to you the whole time, and I won't let anything happen to you. When my daughter was afraid of high places, I used to tell her to look at my eyes instead of looking down. Can you do that for me? Emma took a shaky breath and nodded, slowly, carefully. She climbed onto the windowsill. David reached out and grasped her small hand firmly, feeling how cold and thin her fingers were. That's it, Emma. You're doing great. Now, I'm going to help you step onto this branch, and then we'll climb down together. The descent was nerve-wracking but successful. David kept one arm securely around Emma while using his free hand to navigate from branch to branch. Emma was lighter than he had expected, probably from the malnutrition, which made the climb easier but also made his heart ache for what she had endured. When they finally reached the ground, Emma's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. David immediately pulled out one of the energy bars from his emergency kit and handed it to her. Here, eat this slowly. Your stomach isn't used to food right now, so we need to be careful. Emma tore open the wrapper with trembling hands and took a small bite, closing her eyes as if savoring the taste. It's so good, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. David wrapped his spare jacket around her shoulders and handed her the stuffed elephant. This belonged to my daughter, he said softly. She would have wanted you to have it. Emma clutched the elephant to her chest, looking up at David with eyes full of gratitude and trust. What's her name? Her name was Lily, and she was just about your age when she died. She would have liked you very much. As Emma slowly ate the energy bar, David pulled out his phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he took a deep breath and said, I need to report child abuse and neglect. I have the victim with me, and she's safe, but she needs immediate medical attention and protective custody. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The police arrived first, followed by paramedics who gently examined Emma and confirmed what David already knew. She was severely malnourished and showed signs of long-term neglect. A social worker, named Mrs. Bipp, Patterson arrived shortly after, a kind-faced woman who immediately put Emma at ease with her gentle manner and warm smile.
You did the right thing, Mr.
Martinez, Mrs. Patterson told David as they watched Emma being checked over by the paramedics. Based on her condition and what she's told us about her treatment, this appears to be a clear case of criminal neglect. David watched as police officers approached the Whitmore house where the dinner party was still ongoing. Through the large windows, he could see the shock and outrage on the faces of the guests as the situation was explained. Margaret Whitmore's voice could be heard rising above the others, no doubt trying to control the narrative and protect her reputation. What happens now? David asked Mrs. Patterson. Emma will be taken to the hospital for a full evaluation, and then she'll be placed in emergency foster care while we investigate and build a case against the Whitmores. With her testimony and medical evidence, I'm confident they'll face serious charges. David nodded, but he felt a strange sense of loss as he watched Emma being prepared for transport to the hospital. For a few hours, he had felt needed and purposeful in a way he hadn't experienced since losing his family. The thought of returning to his empty apartment and failing bookstore felt unbearable. Mr. Martinez, Mrs. B. Patterson said, studying his face. I hope you don't mind me asking, but would you be interested in providing a statement about tonight's events? And perhaps, would you be interested in becoming Emma's temporary guardian? David's heart stopped. What do you mean? Emma has been asking for you specifically.
She's formed an attachment, which is understandable given that you rescued her from a traumatic situation.
We typically prefer to place children with certified foster families, but in exceptional circumstances, we can work with individuals who show genuine care and commitment.
Emma needs stability and someone who understands what she's been through. David looked over at Emma, who was sitting in the back of the ambulance, still clutching Lily's stuffed elephant. When she saw him looking, she gave him a small wave and a tentative smile that transformed her entire face. I don't have much money, David said quietly. My business is failing, and I live in a small apartment. I'm not sure I can provide the kind of life she deserves.
Mrs. Fall?
Patterson smiled. Mr. Martinez, in my 20 years of social work, I've learned that love and stability matter much more than money or fancy houses. Emma has been living in luxury with people who treated her like a burden. What she needs now is someone who will treat her like the precious child she is. David thought about his empty apartment, his struggling bookstore, and his life that had felt meaningless for so long. Then he thought about Emma's brave face in the window, her trust in a stranger, and the way she had immediately forgiven him for not being able to prevent her suffering. Yes, he said firmly, I want to help her. I want to take care of her. Mrs. Corcus. Patterson nodded approvingly. There will be paperwork, background checks, and home visits. It won't happen overnight, but if you're serious about this commitment, I believe we can make it work. As the ambulance prepared to leave for the hospital, Emma called out to David, Are you coming with me? David looked at Mrs. Soulsby. Bal? Patterson, who nodded her approval. Yes, sweetheart, he called back. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to figure this out together. For the first time in 2 years, David felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. As he climbed into the ambulance beside Emma, he realized that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. The sterile smell of the hospital and the soft beeping of monitors filled the room, as Emma slept peacefully for the first time in months. David sat in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, watching her small chest rise and fall under the clean white blankets. The doctors had confirmed what he already suspected. Emma was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of chronic stress. But with proper care, she would make a full recovery. It had been 3 days since the rescue, and David hadn't left the hospital except to shower and change clothes at his apartment. Patterson had been working tirelessly on the paperwork needed to make him Emma's temporary guardian, but the process was complicated by his lack of experience with children and his financial situation. Still, Emma's clear preference for David's company and her obvious distress when he wasn't nearby had convinced the social services team that he was the right choice for her immediate care. Mr. Martinez? Dr. Williams, Emma's pediatrician, entered the room quietly. I have good news. Emma's blood work is showing improvement, and she's been eating consistently without any digestive issues. I think she's ready to be discharged tomorrow, if you feel prepared to care for her. David felt a mixture of excitement and terror. I want to take care of her, but I have to admit, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. I've never been solely responsible for a child before, especially one who's been through trauma like Emma has. Doctor. Williams nodded understandingly. Trauma recovery in children requires patience and consistency more than expertise. The most important thing is that she feels safe and loved. I'm going to refer you to a child psychologist who specializes in abuse recovery, and will set up regular checkups to monitor her physical health. That afternoon, David found himself at the children's section of Target, overwhelmed by the choices and unsure of what an 8-year-old girl might need. His apartment was suitable for a single adult, but it wasn't equipped for a child. He would need clothes in her size, school supplies, toys, and countless other things he had never thought about. A sales associate named Jennifer noticed his confusion and approached with a kind smile. "Can I help you find something specific? I'm about to become the guardian of an 8-year-old girl," David explained. "She's been through some difficult times, and I want to make sure she has everything she needs. But I honestly don't know where to start." Jennifer's expression softened. "That's wonderful that you're taking her in. What's her situation like? Has she lost her parents?" David nodded, feeling comfortable sharing with this stranger who seemed genuinely interested in helping. Her parents died when she was 5, and she's been living with guardians who weren't treating her well. She's never had much say in what she likes or wants, so I'm not even sure what kind of things would make her happy. "In my experience with my own daughters," Jennifer said, "children who've been through trauma often just want to feel normal and safe. Comfort items are important. Soft pajamas, a cozy blanket, maybe some books or simple toys. Nothing too overwhelming or expensive. It's more about showing that you're thinking of her specific needs." David spent the next 2 hours carefully selecting items with Jennifer's help. He chose soft, colorful clothes in Emma's size, comfortable pajamas with cartoon characters, a set of books appropriate for her reading level, art supplies, and a few simple toys. Most importantly, he picked out bedding for the spare room in his apartment, sheets covered in stars and moons that reminded him of the night they first met. When he returned to the hospital that evening, Emma was awake and sitting up in bed, coloring in a book that one of the nurses had brought her. Her face lit up when she saw him, and David felt his heart warm at her genuine happiness to see him. "David, look what I drew for you." Emma held up a picture of 2 stick figures standing under a tree, with what appeared to be a star-filled sky above them. "That's you and me when you saved me." The nurse said I could use all the colors I wanted. David accepted the drawing with reverence, studying the careful details Emma had included. The oak tree with its sprawling branches, the window high above, and the sense of movement in the figures that suggested action and purpose. "This is beautiful, Emma. I'm going to frame it and put it in my apartment so I can see it every day." Emma beamed at his response, then looked curious. "Is your apartment where I'm going to live now?" "If you want to," David said carefully. "Mrs. D'Arbeny, Patterson has been working on all the legal stuff, and if everything goes well, you can come stay with me. It's not as big or fancy as the Whitmore's house, but it's warm and safe, and you'll have your own room." Emma considered this seriously. "Will I have my own bed? And will there be food when I'm hungry?" David felt his throat tighten at the simplicity of her requests. "Yes, sweetheart. You'll have your own bed with sheets you picked out yourself, and there will always be food available whenever you want it. In fact, one of your jobs will be helping me figure out what kinds of meals you like so I can learn to cook them for you."
"I can help cook?" Emma asked excitedly.
"Mommy used to let me help make cookies and scrambled eggs." "Absolutely. Cooking together sounds like fun." Mrs. is aware. Patterson arrived that evening with a stack of paperwork and good news. "The emergency custody order has been approved," she told David while Emma was distracted with her coloring. "You'll be her temporary guardian for the next 3 months while we complete the full evaluation process. During that time, we'll have regular check-ins, and if everything goes well, we can discuss making the arrangement permanent." David felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. What about the Whitmores? What's happening with them? They've been charged with criminal child neglect and endangerment. Their lawyer is trying to claim that Emma was simply a difficult child who was being disciplined, that the medical evidence and Emma's testimony are pretty damning. They'll likely face jail time, and they've already been permanently barred from fostering or adopting children. That night, David barely slept as he prepared his apartment for Emma's arrival. He assembled the new bed frame, arranged her clothes in the dresser, and set up a small desk by the window where she could do homework and art projects. He put Lily's stuffed elephant on the bed, along with a new blanket he had chosen in soft purple fabric that he thought Emma might like. The next morning at the hospital, Emma was practically bouncing with excitement as the discharge process was completed. She had eaten a full breakfast without any problems, and Dr. Williams was pleased with her progress. As they walked out of the hospital together, Emma slipped her small hand into David's, a gesture that felt both natural and overwhelming. David said as they drove toward his apartment, "Are you scared about taking care of me?" David considered the question seriously. "A little bit," he admitted. "I want to do a good job, and I want you to be happy and healthy. Sometimes when we care about someone a lot, we worry about making mistakes." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I'm a little scared too, but it's a different scared than I felt at the Whitmore's house. This is excited scared, like when you're about to go on a fun adventure but you don't know what will happen." When they arrived at David's apartment building, Emma looked up at the modest three-story structure with interest rather than disappointment. "It looks cozy," she said approvingly. "Is it quiet here?" "Pretty quiet," David confirmed. "Most of our neighbors are nice, and there's a small park just down the street where kids like to play." Emma's eyes widened. "A park? Can we go there sometime?" "We can go there whenever you want," David assured her, realizing how many simple pleasures Emma had been denied during her time with the Whitmores. When he opened the door to his apartment, Emma stepped inside carefully, taking in the living room with its comfortable but worn furniture, the kitchen table set for two, and the warm light coming through the windows. "It smells like books," she said with approval. David laughed. "That's because I own a bookstore downstairs. Books have been my life for a long time." "Can I see it?" Emma asked eagerly. "After we get you settled in your room, absolutely." David led Emma down the short hallway to what had been his spare room and opened the door. Emma gasped with delight at the sight of her new bed with its star and moon sheets, the desk positioned to catch the afternoon light, and her new clothes hanging neatly in the closet. But what really caught her attention was a framed photo on the nightstand, the drawing she had made for him in the hospital. "You really framed it," she whispered, touching the glass gently. "Of course I did. It's the most important artwork I own." Emma sat on the edge of her new bed, bouncing slightly to test the mattress, then looked up at David with tears in her eyes. "No one ever put anything I made in a frame before." David sat beside her on the bed, careful to maintain appropriate distance while still being supportive. "Emma, I want you to understand something very important. What happened to you with the Whitmores was wrong. The way they treated you had nothing to do with who you are as a person. You are a smart, brave, kind little girl who deserves to be loved and cared for." Emma leaned against his shoulder, still clutching Lily's elephant. "Can I tell you something? You can tell me anything. When I was in that house, I used to pretend that my real parents were still alive somewhere and that they were looking for me. I imagined that someday they would find me and take me away, but now I think maybe they sent you instead. Maybe they knew I needed someone who understood about missing people." David felt tears spring to his eyes. "Maybe they did, sweetheart. And maybe Lily helped them figure out that we both needed each other." That afternoon, David showed Emma the bookstore for the first time. Her eyes grew wide as she took in the thousands of books lining the shelves, the cozy reading nooks he had created throughout the space, and the children's section with its bright colors and low tables perfect for small readers. "This is all yours?" Emma asked in amazement. "It is, though it's not doing very well these days. I haven't been very good at running it since I lost my family." Emma walked slowly through the store, running her fingers along the spines of books, and occasionally pulling one out to examine the cover. In the children's section, she found a series about a girl detective and looked up at David hopefully. "Can I read these?" "You can read any book in the store that interests you," David said. "In fact, maybe you can help me figure out which books kids your age really want to read. I think I've lost touch with what makes children excited about stories." Emma's face lit up with the prospect of having a real job, a way to contribute to their new life together. "I would love to help. I know lots about what kids like because I've read all the books in the library at school." As they walked back upstairs for dinner, David realized that for the first time since the accident, his apartment felt like a home again. Emma's presence had brought life and purpose back into spaces that had felt empty and meaningless. He was still scared about the responsibility of caring for her, still worried about whether he could provide everything she needed, but he was no longer questioning whether he wanted to try. That evening, as Emma helped him prepare a simple dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, she chatted happily about her ideas for the bookstore, her excitement about starting at her new school, and her relief at being able to eat whenever she felt hungry. David listened to her voice filling his quiet apartment and realized that he wasn't just saving Emma, she was saving him right back. One conversation, one smile, one moment of shared purpose at a time. 6 months later, the transformation in both Emma and David's lives was remarkable. Emma had not only recovered physically from her ordeal, but had blossomed into a confident, joyful child, whose laughter echoed through the apartment and bookstore daily. Her nightmares had gradually decreased with the help of Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist who had become an important part of their support system. More importantly, Emma had learned to trust that food would always be available, that she was safe, and that David's love for her was unconditional. David, meanwhile, had discovered that caring for Emma had given him a purpose and energy he thought he had lost forever. The bookstore, which had been failing before Emma's arrival, was now thriving thanks to her enthusiastic help and innovative ideas. She had suggested hosting children's reading circles, family story times, and even a kids' recommend section where young customers could write reviews of their favorite books. The community had responded enthusiastically, and Stories and Dreams had become a gathering place for families throughout Millfield. On a warm spring morning, David stood in the kitchen making Emma's favorite breakfast, pancakes shaped like books, a tradition they had started after her first week with him. Emma sat at the table, already dressed for school, helping him by reading aloud from the local newspaper's community section. "David, listen to this," Emma said excitedly. "There's an article about our bookstore. It says, Stories and Dreams has become the heart of Millfield's family community, offering not just books but a welcoming space where children and parents can connect over the love of reading." Owner David Martinez credits his young assistant Emma for transforming the store's approach to serving families. David smiled as he flipped a pancake. "You're famous, kiddo. Pretty soon people will be asking for your autograph." Emma giggled. "It says you're my dad in the article. Is that okay?" The question caught David off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because of how natural it felt. Over the past months, they had settled into a rhythm that felt more like family than guardianship. Emma called him David, but he had noticed that when she talked to her friends at school or introduced him to other adults, she often referred to him as her dad, without any prompting from him. "How do you feel about that?" David asked carefully, sitting down at the table with their breakfast. Emma considered the question seriously while cutting her pancakes into neat squares. "I think my mummy and daddy will always be my first parents, and I'll always love them and miss them. But you take care of me and love me like a dad does." Patterson says that some kids are lucky enough to have more than one set of parents in their lives. David nodded, understanding the delicate balance Emma was trying to maintain between honoring her original family and accepting her new one. "I think Mrs. Patterson is right. Love doesn't run out just because you share it with more people. Your parents will always be your parents, and if you want me to be your dad too, I would be on it." Emma beamed at him, then reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I would like that very much. Can we make it official?" The adoption proceedings had been moving forward smoothly, with Mrs. Patterson and the court system impressed by Emma's obvious happiness and David's dedicated parenting. The Whitmores had been sentenced to 2 years in prison and had lost all parental rights, clearing the way for David to formally adopt Emma. The final hearing was scheduled for the following week. "Actually," David said with a grin, "next Tuesday, if the judge agrees, it will become very official. You'll legally be Emma Martinez, and I'll legally be your dad." Emma's eyes filled with happy tears. "Really? Emma Martinez? I like how that sounds." After Emma left for school, David spent the morning in the bookstore organizing a new shipment of children's books and preparing for the afternoon reading circle that had become one of their most popular events. As he worked, he reflected on how completely his life had changed since that night he heard Emma crying. He had gone from a man with nothing to live for to someone with a daughter to raise, a business to run, and a future full of possibilities. The bell above the door chimed, and David looked up to see Mrs. Patterson entering with a warm smile. She had become more than just a social worker to them. She was a friend and advisor who had guided them through every step of their journey together. "Good morning, David," she said, approaching the counter. "I have some wonderful news about Tuesday's hearing." "Good news, I hope," David said, though he felt confident that the adoption would be approved. "The best news." Judge Morrison reviewed all the reports from Emma's doctors, her school, and our home visits. "She's prepared to finalize the adoption next week. Emma will officially be your daughter." David felt a wave of relief and joy wash over him. "Thank you for everything you've done for us, Mrs. Tatayo." Patterson. "I know the process wasn't easy, especially with my lack of traditional parenting experience." Mrs. Patterson laughed. "David, in all my years of social work, I've rarely seen a child flourish the way Emma has. You've given her exactly what she needed. Stability, love, and the chance to be a normal, happy kid. The fact that you've done it while rebuilding your own life and business makes it even more remarkable." That afternoon, the bookstore filled with families for the weekly reading circle. Emma burst through the door after school, dropping her backpack behind the counter and immediately going to greet the children who had already arrived. David watched with pride as she helped the younger kids find comfortable spots on the carpet and distributed the picture books they would be reading together. "Today we're reading about families," Emma announced to the group. "All different kinds of families because families come in all shapes and sizes." As she began reading aloud from a book about adoption, David noticed a new family in the back of the group. A single mother with twin boys who looked to be about Emma's age. The woman seemed hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether she belonged in this gathering of families. During the break between stories, David approached her with a warm smile. "I don't think we've met. I'm David Martinez, and this is my daughter Emma's idea, these reading circles. The woman smiled gratefully. I'm Maria Santos, and these are my boys, Carlos and Diego. We just moved to Millfield, and I've been looking for activities where they might meet other kids. Your daughter is wonderful with children. She's had some experience with feeling new and uncertain, David said carefully. Moving to a new place can be scary, but the community here is very welcoming. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared at David's side.
Hi, are you new here?
I'm Emma. Do your boys like books about adventure? I know all the best ones. Within minutes, Emma had Carlos and Diego engrossed in a discussion about their favorite superhero stories, and Maria was chatting comfortably with other parents. David watched this scene with amazement, remembering the frightened, hungry child he had met just months ago. Emma had not only healed from her trauma, but had developed a special sensitivity to other people who felt lost or alone. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become one of David's favorite parts of every day, Emma was unusually quiet and thoughtful. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" David asked, as they worked side by side at the counter. "I was thinking about the Santos family today," Emma said. "Mrs. Santos looked sad, like she was worried about whether she was doing a good job with her boys. It reminded me of how you looked sometimes when I first came to live with you." David paused in his chopping of vegetables. "What do you mean? You were scared that you wouldn't know how to take care of me right. But you learned, and you did a great job. Maybe Mrs. Santos just needs someone to believe in her like I believed in you." David felt his heart swell with pride at Emma's insight and compassion. "What do you think we could do to help them feel more welcome?" Emma's face lit up with an idea. "Could we invite them for dinner this weekend?" The boys seemed really interested in the bookstore, and maybe Mrs. Santos would like to see that single parents can build good lives for their kids. The dinner invitation led to a friendship that enriched all their lives. Maria was a nurse who worked long hours to support her family, and she was grateful to have found a community where her boys felt accepted and encouraged. In return, she provided medical expertise that helped David better understand Emma's ongoing recovery needs and offered the perspective of another single parent navigating the challenges of raising children alone. As spring turned to summer, the bookstore continued to thrive, becoming a hub for community activities beyond just reading circles. Emma organized a summer reading program, David hosted author visits, and they even started a small cafe area where families could enjoy snacks while browsing books. The success of the business meant that David could provide more comfortably for Emma's needs and even start saving for her future education. The adoption hearing on Tuesday was a celebration rather than a legal formality. Judge Morrison, a grandmotherly woman with kind eyes, spoke directly to Emma during the proceedings. "Emma, do you understand what it means for Mr. Martinez to adopt you?" the judge asked. Emma stood straight and confident beside David. "It means he'll be my legal dad forever, and I'll be his legal daughter forever. But really, we've already been a family in our hearts for a long time. And you want this adoption to happen?" "Yes, Your Honor. David saved me when I was in trouble, and then he taught me that families can be made of people who choose to love each other. I choose him, and he chooses me." Judge Morrison smiled warmly. "Then it's my pleasure to grant this adoption. Emma Martinez, welcome to your forever family." The courtroom erupted in quiet applause from the friends who had come to support them. Mrs. Jewell, Patterson, Dr. Chen, Maria and her boys, and several families from the bookstore community. Emma hugged David tightly, and he felt complete in a way he had never expected to experience again. That night, as they celebrated with a special dinner at Emma's favorite restaurant, she presented David with a gift, a photo album she had been working on with Maria's help. The pages chronicled their journey together, from newspaper clippings about her rescue to photos of their daily life, pictures from the bookstore events, and drawings Emma had made showing their growing family, which now included their extended community of friends. On the last page, Emma had written in her careful handwriting, "To my dad, who heard me crying and never stopped listening. Thank you for teaching me that love makes families, not just biology. Love, your daughter Emma Martinez." As David looked through the album, Emma curled up beside him on the couch, no longer the frightened, hungry child he had found beneath a window, but a confident, loving daughter who had brought purpose and joy back into his life. "Dad," Emma said sleepily, "do you think Lily and my first parents would be happy about us being a family?" David considered the question, thinking about the daughter and wife he had lost and the parents Emma still missed. "I think they would be very happy, sweetheart. Love doesn't disappear when people die. It finds new ways to grow and spread. I think all of them would be proud of the strong, caring girl you've become and the family we've built together." Emma nodded contentedly. "I think so too." And maybe someday we can help other kids who need families, like how Mrs. Patterson helped us find each other. David kissed the top of her head, already knowing that Emma's generous heart would lead them to many more opportunities to make a difference in other people's lives. Their story had begun with a cry in the night and a stranger's compassionate response, but it had become something much larger. A testament to the power of love, to heal wounds, build bridges, and create families where none existed before. Looking around their cozy apartment, filled with the sounds of Emma's breathing and the distant hum of the bookstore below, David realized that he had not just saved a child that night 6 months ago. Emma had saved him right back, giving him a reason to live fully again, and showing him that sometimes the most broken people can create the most beautiful families. Their story was no longer about loss and abandonment, but about love, resilience, and the extraordinary things that can happen when two people who need each other find the courage to build a life together. Emma Martinez was no longer a child left without food by heartless guardians. She was a beloved daughter whose cries had reached exactly the right person at exactly the right time, proving that miracles sometimes come in the form of everyday heroes who simply refuse to walk away from someone in need.